Good afternoon, everybody. How y'all doing today? I want to talk about a little something that happened a couple days ago, and it was a couple days ago, so I'm kind of late to the party on this one, maybe, but so be it. It's not really so much about the thing that happened, which is kind of a footnote in the grand scheme of things when it comes to this team, but it kind of got me thinking about something, and I kind of want to talk about something a little bit here. So most of you guys have probably already heard about this or seen this. It's nothing terribly dramatic, but KJ Wright doesn't appreciate the slander towards his former team. And he went on Good Morning Football a couple days ago and decided to stick up for him. So, amid all these people who are saying the Seahawks are going to be very, very bad this year, he said, do not be surprised if the Seahawks make a serious playoff push. So he's not just saying they're not going to be bad. He's not just saying they're not going to be forgettable. He's saying, hey, I think this team can win more than they lose. I think they can actually be one of the top seven teams in their conference. And I think that they will be playing meaningful football late in December, if not early January. So, look, I'm not saying I agree with KJ Wright, but I do want to talk about this for a second here because it did get me thinking. And by the way, KJ Wright didn't just talk about this on a TV show. He went to Twitter and stood up for his guys. You can see. I'm not going to read through all of this, but a few people saw the post on Twitter and were like, "No way, dude, you're out there." And KJ, he's not playing football right now, so he's got a little bit of free time on his hands. He decides he's going to shoot out some replies. He's not gonna let he's not gonna let people just say negative things about his team and not have him try to counter it. And some of it was kind of jokey. You think your team gonna make it? That's not really an argument, right? But he does have a couple of actual, you could kind of call them arguments in here. He says Seattle's never been as bad as teams like the Lions and Texans. Why would they start now? You can go through some of this other stuff here with the Panthers. You can see that he's questioning whether or not the division is that good. That's an area I don't really agree with him on. I do think this division is quite good, and that's a problem in trying to get wins together. He says he thinks they can start out 4 and 0 and that you should check in around week 8 to see how they're doing. And he again doubles down on his belief that this division is not great. So KJ is willing to go to bat for this team and say, hey, don't count them out. They have a chance to have a good season, make a playoff push, and be one of the better teams in the NFL. When I look at this upcoming season, I think the ceiling, like the best we could do without some miracle happening, staying within the realm of what is realistic, is 8 wins. So you do the math, you'll see that that's still a losing record. So I'm not saying I'm on board with KJ. I think more likely is somewhere around 6 to 7 wins, but I don't see where this team is going to be have a winning record or compete for a playoff spot. But I do want to talk about the opposite extreme here, where you're seeing some people, you're seeing some professionals, even people who do this for a living, um, talk about the Seahawks as one of the worst teams in the league, and in some cases, the worst team in the league. I've seen more than one power ranking, and anybody can do power rankings, and they don't mean anything. I understand that, but actual like power rankings from people who are trying to be taken seriously, that the Seahawks are going to be the worst team in the league in 2022, and I can see why people would maybe think that at first. You look at our QB depth chart, it may be the worst QB depth chart in the NFL. And the NFL right now is a quarterback driven league. So you have the worst quarterbacks. You have a big head start on maybe having the worst team. And you combine that with a difficult to deal with division that includes the two teams that played in the NFC title game, the team that won the Super Bowl, and three teams that made the playoffs, then it's kind of understandable that you would get off to a start like that. And then you add in letting players like Bobby Wagner go, who had the reputation of being one of the greatest middle linebackers of all time. and you look at our free agency period where we didn't really do anything, it wouldn't be amazing. It wouldn't be shocking if this team was truly terrible, like number one overall pick terrible, and did have some kind of 2-win or 3-win season. But I do want to point something out when talking about this team and talking about the people who are still in charge of it, which, we've gone back and forth plenty about this off season. I'm not the biggest Pete Carroll fan in the world, but it seems to me, if you look at some of the things this team has done since he got here, he's actually a little better than the average at taking a roster of players that really isn't good and finding a way to make the results at the very least presentable. And I want to talk about that a little bit here because I think people might be missing that just a little bit when looking at this team. So I find myself thinking about the 2018 Seahawks. This is just 4 years ago. Most of you guys should remember that. Pretty good team. They won 10 games, made the wild card. Specifically, I want to talk about their defense because Carroll, he's a defensive guy. The defense is his baby. He's the responsible one for the defense at the end of the day. Ken Norton, Dan Quinn, Gus Bradley, no, not really. Like a little bit, right? So I was thinking about this team's defense. Now, the thing to understand is this defense was pretty good. We can go into all the finer points of all their actual metrics, but the bottom line is that they were 11th in the league in points allowed. 11th. So on the very border of the top 10. That makes them notably above average. That makes them not great, but good. You can spend some time boiling down into exactly where they fell on that scale, but we can say this defense was good. But who was on that 2018 Seahawks defense? Let's take a look here. Let's refresh our memories here. Okay. You had Bobby Wagner, one of the best players in the league, one of the best players all time at his position, having one of his best years. He didn't miss one game, actually, but he played a full elite season, made the All-Pro team, made the Pro Bowl. He was everything you could ask for. Okay, that's one certified full-on blue chipper, right? You had two guys who could rush the passer at a high level, and Frank Clark having the best year of his career, and Jerron Reed also probably having the best year of his career. Both those guys had double-digit sacks. And after that, what are you seeing here? You're seeing no Cliff Averill and no Michael Bennett, the two best pass rushers on the elite Seahawks defenses of the several years before this. Averill and Bennett are both gone. You're not seeing Cam. He had retired or was in the process of going through an injury that would ultimately result in his retiring. You're not seeing Earl Thomas very much. He played in 4 games, or not even 4 games, and then got injured. Never played for the Seahawks again, so you barely got any Earl. You barely got any KJ as well, I believe. I can't even find him on this list, I don't think, because he got injured before the season started and ended up barely playing. I think he played in like 5 games. So the guys who defined the Seahawks defense for years were gone. Sherman was gone. So there really wasn't a whole lot of blue chip talent or even solid talent on this defense after the top 3. Bradley McDougald was okay. He was pretty good. Okay, yeah, decent strong safety, decent cam replacement. Tedrick Thompson played a lot. He hadn't yet become the player that people would really despise, but I mean, Tedrick Thompson, there's a reason why he hasn't made much of an impact in the NFL even to this day. You had rookie Trey Flowers, who had played safety in college, trying to start at corner. You had Shaquille Griffin having a down year after what was a pretty impressive 2017 rookie season. Barkvarius Mingo played significant snaps. You got significant time from Austin Calitro. Quentin Jefferson, pretty jaggy. Dion Jordan, failed reclamation project. Lano Hill, jag. You brought in Michael Kendricks from the courtroom. One of your leading sackers after the top 2 guys was Jacob Martin with 3. Rasheem Green was too young to really do much of anything other than make a flash every now and then. Like, you look at this defense, and it's not good overall. There are a couple of good pieces, but when your fourth best player on defense is probably Bradley McDougald, you should be looking at a defense that you would expect to be bad. But this defense was not bad. This defense was good. And in the irony of ironies, over the next couple of years, they would add more players, add better players. And the defense got worse. The next year, we had Jadeveon Clowney and eventually traded for Quandre Diggs. And both those guys played well for us, but the defense got worse. The next year, we traded for Jamal Adams, and the defense was one of the worst in the NFL, if not the worst, until you finally got Dunlap. And even after that, he needed time to settle. So you look at this defense and you're like, this defense had no business being even average. You have Trey Flowers starting 15 games at corner when he was a college safety. You've got randos like Bargvarius Mingo and Austin Calitro giving you significant snaps. You're pulling guys literally out of the courtroom to play linebacker for you in a few games. You're taking flyers on guys like Dion Jordan, who already flamed out badly in his first NFL stop. And yet the defense was pretty good. So this is what I'm talking about. You take that collection of talent that is weak, and Carroll, while I do think that on some level maybe he struggles to get results when you actually give him a little bit more talent, as weird as that sounds, based on what happened the next couple of years, you see him find a way to get the most out of limited players and still have a pretty good year. The defense was not the best part of the 2018 team, but it was overall, I would say, positive impact on our season. So there you go. But there's an even more extreme example. And look, this happened a long time ago. I'm not going to act like Carroll is the same person who he was in 2010. But I want to talk about 2010 a little bit here as well, because if you, looking back at this team, first of all, I think you guys know they went 7-9. Okay, so little below average, 7-9. Similar to the record I suspect they're going to have in 2022, by the way. But let's look at this roster. Let's remember how bad this was. Matt Hasselbeck didn't even play in every game. Look, if look at these numbers. This is like noticeably, significantly worse than Geno Smith. And I know it's a different era of football. This was before they changed all the rules after Super Bowl 48. But if a quarterback in the current NFL had a season anywhere near this bad, they would not hold that starting job very long. Geno Smith last year was significantly better than Hasselbeck was this year. You also had Charlie Whitehurst, who was no better. So, hey, this is another team. Some of the worst quarterbacks in the league. You go down the list. They didn't have a single player go over 600 rushing yards. Their leading running back averaged 3.5 yards a carry. Yeah, Marshawn Lynch, once upon a time, was that ineffective for a full season. They had no players over 800 receiving yards and one player above 500. They had no players above 70 receptions, and they had one player above 40 receptions. Like, look at some of these names too. Look at what happened to these guys. Like okay, of course Marshawn Lynch and Lynch and Forsett would see better days, but Julius Jones, I don't think he lasted in the league very long. We got miles out of Dion Butler, Ben Obomanu, Mike Williams. Remember that reclamation project that worked for a little bit? Brandon Stokely winding out the end of his career. Dion Branch before he ran back to New England doing practically nothing. Like, you look at this roster of skill players on offense, and it's really bad. Not only because of how little they produced, but also because what they would go on to do in future years to show they weren't very good players. And the defense, I mean, David Hawthorne, he was okay. He would go to New Orleans after 4 years in Seattle and have some decent years. But most of this stuff is just like Lawyer Malloy, retirement tour. Lofa Tatupu, final year before his body gave out. Marcus Trufant in maybe his last decent year before his body gave out. Earl Thomas is a rookie who played well, but there were some rookie struggles there. I mean, you go down the list here, maybe Chris Clemens is legit, but other than that, there's not a whole lot. Kelly Jennings was still on this team. Raheem Brock, I guess he had his last good season before his career was basically over. But you were leaning on guys like Will Herring. You were not really seeing anything from guys like Cam or, excuse me, Cam Chancellor yet. So it wasn't like he was there. Or, well, he was there, but he wasn't ready. Red Bryant gave you a little bit, but he only played in 7 games. I mean, you look at this defense and you say, there's not a whole lot going on here. You're leaning heavily on guys who are well past their prime, like Laura Malloy. He was literally maybe a top 3 player on this defense. Leaned heavily on Aaron Curry, finding out exactly how bad he was and how ineffective he was at football. And you still had a lot of the trash that Carroll wanted to clean off the roster, but couldn't yet because there's only so much you can do in one off season. Think about the team that Carroll took over this year. He took over a team that won 5 games the previous year and 4 games before that. But that 2009 Seahawks team was probably worse than their record. That was a terribly depressing team that found some weird way to win 5 games, but that was a terrible team. And this team, you look at it, probably should have been terrible too. You've got Chris Clemens, legit, Earl Thomas as a rookie, talent, potential, flashes, but not yet the great player he was going to be. And also Rands like Malloy and Tutupu in the final years of their career. I think this was it for Tutupu. And the roster as a whole, it looks like a 2-win team. It looks like a 3-win team. And by the way, I know some people are going to say, oh, well, they obviously just beat up on other terrible teams. And there's some truth to that, but they did actually win 2 games against teams that would go on to have winning records, the Chargers and the Bears. So there's certainly some merit to that argument. I'm not going to completely dispute it, but to say that they only beat up on bad teams is not true. So I'm not going to say this team is good. If you look at their rankings in like points scored, points allowed, they're bad. They're bad, but they somehow managed to find a way to ugly up the game. That's the best way I can put it, to where they could have issues across the board and still find a way to win a handful of games. Now, I'm not happy about this. I don't take any warmth out of a few extra wins in a bad season. But what I'm trying to say is, don't assume that this team is just going to limp their way to 2 wins and peace out of 2022. I'm not going to be shocked if that's the case, but if you look at what's happened since Carroll got here, he seems to have a pretty good grasp of taking a pretty lackluster slate of players and finding a way to get some kind of results with them. At the very least, finding a way to win a few games with like this team. No quarterback, terrible quarterback play. Running game was below average to bad. No good receivers. Just the offensive line wasn't very good yet. This was still the old offensive line, kind of just dangling on for the most part, and guys who you just basically pick up off the street. The defense, the big part of the core of the defense was of guys who were in the twilight of their career and guys who would go on to just be journeymen and jags. So I look at that and I go, this team's probably going to be bad, but I don't see them being the worst team in the league. I don't see them winning 2 or 3 games. I see them fighting. I see them occasionally getting blown out by teams that just have way more talent than them. But I think this is in some ways this is kind of Carroll's bag. He kind of, I think some part of him likes, 2018, I remember a game against the Bears, week 2, where we lost, but we had basically no linebackers for that game. Bobby was out, KJ was out. That was the game I think we pulled Michael Kendricks out for because we were so desperate for somebody, and yet somehow the defense held tough in that game, And if the offense had woken up at all, we would have had a real chance to win that one. I think Carroll like embraces that challenge, and he does a pretty good job at finding ways to win ugly. It kind of makes me think of those Knicks teams in the 90s where they didn't have the best players. Their best player couldn't really move that well anymore, so they just turned games into a kind of an ugly fest, and they thought they could win if they could just limit possessions and keep the score low. Kind of makes me think of that. So I'm not standing with KJ here. I'm not saying that KJ's right. I'm not saying we're going to make the playoffs. But I do think there's some merit in pointing out here that the people who are quick to bury us as the worst team in the league, I don't see that happening. And again, this is not coming from a place of me wanting us so badly to win 6 games instead of 3. I don't get anything out of that personally. But I'm calling it like I see it for the moment. All right, see you guys later today. Should be streaming on Twitch. Go Hawks. See you there.